Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I work in the business school here, so it was not really a trouble for me to come to this venue. I thank Surya and other organizers who invited me to this event. When Surya a few months ago contacted me for this event and possible contribution, I was delighted, and also in a way it was a coincidence because I had meant to work on this topic for quite a few years, but then I work in the area of diversity, including my work has focused on gender, migration, ethnicity, religion, but sexual orientation so far had evaded, if you call, my review. So I thought that maybe I should identify a topic which is not only something of interest and relevant, but also in the given socio-political context is also somewhat sensitive and is also somewhat perhaps misunderstood. So I too, because of my own identity as an investigator, and also because I come from Pakistan and from an Islamic background, I wanted to develop my own understanding. So something which I'm sharing with you is conceptual, it's provocative, but it's also something which I hope will raise certain questions and will also identify, if you call it, certain ways to resolution, if there is any resolution possible. So sexual orientation, diversity in Islam is the topic, but before I formally start, if you call my presentation, I would like you to contextualize it in the context of Islam versus West.
So, the question was about sexual preference and women.
In Iran, we don't have homosexuals like in your country. We don't have that in our country. In Iran, we do not have this phenomenon. I don't know who's told you that we have it. Killing.
The question was about...
Some of you might be aware, I vividly recall this lecture. He was, I'm sure that all of us all here know that it is the ex-Iranian president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. We are talking about 2007 when he had to deliver a speech at the United Nations as a part of their annual tradition. But he was also invited by the Columbia University, and so this question was posed to him about the rights of LGBT community within Iran, and then he came up with a straight denial that this doesn't exist. So now we have to also understand that there is one thing which is pretty obvious here, which is homophobia of somebody who is head of a state. But there is also something which is obvious here. Perhaps we would need to be a little bit more critical here, that this is the context where head of an Islamic country has been invited to an audience, to a Western audience, and a number of questions are being posed. So here we are juxtaposing, here we are dealing with not only, if you call it homophobia, but there is also something else at play. That is something which I will touch in a minute. Okay, glossary is not really needed. This is to contextualize homosexuality and the law within Muslim majority countries' context. So we know that there are quite a few countries where homosexuality it is not legally permissible. Different countries deal with this phenomenon in various ways. In some countries, there is capital sentence for this crime or sin. And in certain other countries, there are lesser, if you call it, intensity punishments. Also, this is important to note that these punishments are not always enforced in many countries. So yes, theoretically they are there. And I'm sure that many of us who are working and investigating in this area are aware that as far as the legal tradition and the history is concerned, the legislation traces back to the same very country in which this speech is being made. The tradition of legislation against homosexuality. It is not something which is indigenous to India or indigenous to Pakistan or Iran. It traces back to this very. So therefore, one of my friends was referring back to the Home Office. I wanted to say that Home Office itself is not really to be exonerated. Not then, not now. Okay, so Pew conducted a research in 2013, and this is just to give you an overview of what exactly is the Muslim populace's views about homosexuality. We can say it's pretty negative. It's quite negative. In Malaysia, it's 18 to 29 age group. Only 7% of them would be tolerant of homosexuality. In Turkey, 7%. Palestinian territories, 5%. But then you come to Jordan, Egypt, Tunisia, and Pakistan. So we can see that based on the survey data which is available, that as far as the general population is concerned, there is very, at least on the visible level, there is very less tolerance of homosexuality. Okay, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that resistance is not there, that there are not individual groups and individuals who are asserting their own identity and who are making use of resources. Particularly given that we are living in the 21st century and now that we have resources in the shape of social media, people are asserting their identity. Perhaps they are using pen names. Many of them are using pen names. Many of them are using aliases. But then, indeed, there are avenues where they are able to assert their identity, where they are able to consult with each other and to provide, if you call it, useful resources to each other. So here, this was a very positive message which I identified from the Pakistan Gay Rights Movement Facebook page. It's nice to see your Facebook page and read one of the blogs. Hope you guys manage to change something in the country, but above all, I really hope you guys can manage to change the mentality of the people. So it's the attitude, it's the understanding, it's the awareness, it's the spaces which have to be created. So indeed, there is evidence of agency, there is evidence of transition, there is evidence of dynamism. We are not talking to something which is static and which is dead. No, we are dealing with something which is transient. Mohsen Hamid, I'm sure that some of you would be aware, the writer of The Reluctant Fundamentalist and other similar novels and movies, some of which have been converted into movie. There is a lot of homosexuality inside Pakistan. It is not an issue people talk about. There is kind of societal nervous laughter on the subject. It evokes smiles and giggles, but there aren't many public formats in which to have a serious conversation about it. But that doesn't hide the fact that queer Muslims, they are confronted with what I identify as vulnerability at multiple levels. They are vulnerable to discrimination, othering, and persecution. There is a fear of coming out, which is psychological vulnerability, tension between their faith identity and sexual identity. Is it really possible? Is it possible to be a Muslim and be a gay, for example? How do these two identities reconcile? So perhaps we as academics might identify certain nuances, but for ordinary people in the public, this really poses a major challenge. Isolation in the family and ethnic or faith community, which is social vulnerability. A legal system, for example, the Iranian context or the Saudi context. I would not refer to Pakistani context so much because we do not have much precedence of legal punishment of gays, though it is there in the legislation, but to my knowledge it is not really enforced. But Iranian example, And Saudi context are really those contexts which I would refer to in terms of a legal system that penalizes homosexuality, and then intersectionality of sexuality with religion, ethnicity, and race. So how does this intersectionality demonstrate itself in the opportunities that we have within our own families, within our own workplaces, within our own universities, and within our own sports clubs? So the lenses which I would be using, and I'm using for this research, are two lenses, intersectionality and post-colonial lens. So intersectionality, I'm sure that many of us here are aware that here we are dealing with the intersectionality of sexual orientation identity with other forms of identity, which in this context would be religion and ethnicity. The topic intersectionality has been dealt with in depth in other contexts. For example, when one of my colleagues here, she dealt with the issue of the intersection of age, migration, and gender. Indeed, that was an issue of intersectionality. Okay. So key issues which are currently facing queer Muslims can be identified as 5. My focus would be number 2, but let's discuss number 1 as well. First is the perception of negative reactions from family and ethnic communities to declaring a public homosexual identity. So it's coming out, and the related perception of public homosexual identity as something which is Western, that look, you are under a British influence. You are under an American influence. So it's now you are no longer an Indian. You are no longer a Pakistani or Iranian, for example. Now you belong to where you have been brainwashed, where you have been exposed to. So now that is something which comes as a question mark. Queer politics, where my argument is that the issues of rights which could be made available to LGBT individuals within the workplace and outside the workplace, they are currently hijacked by these two extreme positions. One is the Islamic position, or Islamic position, and the other is a Western lens, which at times also indulges in a phobia of Islam. So basically, the opportunities of equality and the access to resources, they are currently stuck in the middle of homophobia and Islamophobia. So that is something which I also wanted to hint towards in the first video which I showed to you. Individual reinterpretations of Islamic text to accommodate homosexuality, that is the third issue which I identify. There is a possibility. Based on my own reading of the Islamic text, I think that there is some vagueness, and if there is some ambiguity, there is always chance that if the ambiguity is there, this means that people can interpret it in many different ways. As we know that there is not one Islam, there are many Islams. Muslim practices in one country, even within one community, are not identical to other Muslim practices. And so there is also a possibility there. I was not able to identify something very specific in particular in the Quranic context, which said that no, this is outlawed or this is straight away prohibited. Once again, that is my subjective interpretation. And as a Muslim, I'm as much entitled to interpretation as any other person. This is something because Islam, unlike many other religions, is not really hierarchical. So we can make our own interpretation and we can practice it. That is what I argue. The fourth is the absence of a sizable, visible community. Of course, they need support, and that kind of social support is simply not there. I would also say that though we find in Pakistan, for example, there was a documentary perhaps a few days ago, How Gay is Pakistan, that only represents a microcosm. So those resources are not available to the LGBT community on the whole. So we are talking about the intersection of homosexuality and class. So that also has to be kept in mind. The lack of awareness and understanding of sexuality, the discourse of science and the discourse of human rights. So these are some of the issues. Here I would like to share with you the American-Iranian Khalida Syed, she discusses her brother's reaction when she came out. So this is something which I present as an example of homosexuality. You have become a lesbian, this is your Americanness. This has nothing to do with Islam, this has nothing to do with Iran, and this is how it is being presented. The most compelling argument she came up, her mother came up with, was that I was far too Americanized and that my sexuality was an offspring of the American values I had internalized. This last argument may or may not have a ring of truth to it. I'm not sure I would have had the balls to discuss my sexuality at all, or even consider it, if my American side had not told me I had the right. So for example, in one of the previous presentations where more than 70% of the Hindu community and the Sikh community expressed support for homosexuality, I'm not sure that the number will be as high if the same research would be conducted in the Indian context, for example. So the context, the socio-political context, and if you call it the conditioning itself also has an impact upon how, in terms of the choices that we make. Let's come to queer politics and reforms. Within queer politics, I believe that there are three issues which have to be understood and which have to be highlighted and recognized. Number one, it is not only an issue of human rights. Indeed, it is an issue of human rights. Indeed, it is an issue of equality. But it is also an issue of homophobia versus Islamophobia. And we can see that whenever, for example, something negative about the treatment of homosexuals in Muslim majority countries or even in Muslim communities in the diaspora would be highlighted. Indeed, one very significant undercurrent would be that this is because of Islam, because Islam is not really reconcilable with modern values, with modern democracy, for example. So that is something which I think that it needs to be highlighted and stated and restated. Queer Muslims are treated as an impossible subject, and this is not only from an external perspective, but also from an internal perspective, where I said that there are tensions, that whether these two identities, are they reconcilable? Is it possible to be a queer Muslim, to be a good Muslim and be a good queer? So that is number two. And the third, which Rahman identifies, is the notion of Western superiority and post-colonial resistance. That on the one hand, that we are the flag bearers of human rights, we are the flag bearers of freedom, we are the flag bearers of equality, and therefore the notions, the models that we have identified, that we have devised here in terms of legislation, in terms of regulations, those are the notions, those are the laws upon which everybody else would be evaluated. And that is how we will decide who is civilized, who is more civilized than the other. So, is there any possibility for reforms? Is there a possibility that these two extreme positions can be reconciled? Indeed, there should be a possibility. We cannot, as I mentioned, that we cannot be frozen in time. And indeed, the societies are not frozen in time. So this means that societies do evolve and they do create spaces for those who are othered, who have been historically othered and who have been historically persecuted. For example, the case of women is in front of us. The case of the treatment of black and ethnic minorities within the UK and the US is also in front of us. So there is a possibility, but it is equally important that we also need to free the agendas of equality and human rights from political misappropriation. We should not allow these topics to be politically misappropriated for political gains. That's one thing which I think that if we don't do it, then perhaps engagement would not be possible. Then there are two extreme positions which are there. The second is that we also need to refer to the evidence of homosexuality or heteronormativity, homonormativity within the Muslim tradition. We know that that in the Mughal era, in the Abbasid era, in the Umayyad era, during various caliphates I'm referring to, even during the Ottoman era, there are some examples. I'm not talking about many examples, but there are quite a few examples where we can identify that homosexuality was not always something which was towards which the populace was extremely intolerant as it is now. based on the peer research, for example. And there is also, I think, the way I look at this issue of queer rights in Islam and how they can be reconciled with Islam, I also take it as an opportunity for Muslim thinkers and scholars and analysts to treat it as an opportunity for political reform, to expand their political thought, to treat their religion as non-static, to treat their religion as more heterogeneous than homogeneous, and to create, and it continues to create spaces, and it should continue to create spaces for pluralism. There indeed we also have to acknowledge that there are heterogeneities within Islam. So you will find certain, if you call it denominations or sects, which would be more tolerant than others. The other sects or denominations or groups or outfits will be more intolerant. We know many examples. We know what ISIS is doing, for example, with the gay people in Iraq and Syria. But at the same time, we also know that there is a Sufi tradition. There is a tradition of Sufi shrines where we see that people who do not belong to the heterosexual norm, they freely participate in the festivities in those shrines, not only in Pakistan, but also in India and Turkey, and where they have relatively more opportunity to express themselves. Okay. I think that this I have already touched upon, but let me discuss something else. Yes. Abraham says that queer Muslims may be seen as impossible or unviable subjects whose very existence would be disrupting the ontological coherence of the dominant identity. Narratives of both queer and Muslims. But the literature which I did read, it does testify to the ways in which queer Muslims fundamentally challenge the oppositional discourse of Islam and sexual diversity. So we know that, some of us, I hope we know that there are certain groups within Muslims who have been presenting their arguments on the basis of Islamic discourse. So they have been referring to, for example, the Quranic traditions, within which they say that there is a space for us, give us space. So the idea is this, that the engagement is possible. So the queer Muslims, there was a group which currently doesn't exist anymore. I believe that its name was Al-Fatiha, that was based in the US, and they worked for the reforms and to create awareness for the LGBT rights within the domain of Islam. Rahman calls it homo-colonialism, that whatever we have defined here in the US context or the UK context has to be adopted in an identical form. I would move towards I think I have touched upon the early to medieval history, but let me share something with you. This colonial influences. Pakistan's law currently, it criminalizes consensual same-sex relation, and this dates back to 1860. We know that Pakistan didn't come into being in 1860. Pakistan came into being in 1947. This law doesn't belong to Pakistan. So you see that there are things. So for example, I'm sure that many of us here are aware that there are certain things which can be attributed to some extent to colonization. Anti-Semitism was never a characteristic of those countries where currently it is there in full force. So anti-Semitism and homophobia are one of those things which, along with English, we can identify as colonial legacies. So this is, after Pakistan received independence in 1947, the parliament decided to continue. Now, the second last point here, I have taken from an article which was published in The Guardian, once again a Western media, which says that the Sharia-based laws dating from the 1980s laid down punishment for same-sex sexual activity. So you see that who is being blamed? That the Sharia is being blamed, the laws which were introduced in 1980s, but the law itself dates back to 1860. So it's not only Pakistan. Let me give you another example. Section 377. It's a notorious section. If you call it, it shows the overarching colonial legacy. Section 377 of the Penal Code. In 42 former British colonies, criminalizes anal sex between men and others. Homosexual acts, the provision was introduced by British colonial authorities during Raj as Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code, which became Pakistan Penal Code with very minor amendments, and was used as a model for sodomy laws in many other British colonies, India, Malaysia, Singapore, Pakistan, Bangladesh, you name it. So I think that I have already exhausted all the time which had been allocated to me. With this, I can conclude my provocations.